So a list comprehension, it's basically a one-line version of a for loop when we want to return a specific list, but we don't really want to write a whole for loop and define specific variables. All we care about is that list that we want to generate in place. So here is let me start with as an example. Let me start with for instance, for num in numbers. um, let's say my list dot append num multiplied by 2, and let's say numbers is just a list of numbers, and then my list is an empty list, right? So what I'm trying to do here is let me print. Basically, in part of my code, let's say this is part of my code that I'm developing. I'm trying to define a list that its elements are multiplied by 2 from like I have an original list and I want a new list that its elements are twice the value, or times the values of the original list are multiplied by 2 in my new list. Now, instead of doing this whole process, I could do something like this in a list comprehension version of that. I could say, well, here is how it works. I could say for num in numbers, so I'm going to keep these numbers here. For num in numbers, now what I was writing as the command that needs to be executed for each iteration comes to the beginning of this, would be num times 2, right? So what I'm saying is that multiply the num variable by 2 for num in numbers, right? So if I run that, I'm going to get the same list. So instead of writing a whole for loop, defining an empty list and appending, I just do everything in place. So this is what is referred to as list comprehension, right? A little bit of more advanced of this would be to even add a specific condition. All right, let's say I am doing what I was doing before. Let's see if I can modify that. Let's say this is what I was doing before, right? Let's, instead of that, let's say I want to do something like if num is an even number, right, then append the list, right? So let's say my for loop has an if statement in it, like inside, and I'm saying I'm taking only the elements that are even and then multiply them by 2 and put in the new list, instead of doing this operation for every single item in my list, in my numbers, that list. I just do it for the elements that are items that are even numbers. So in this case, I'll get 4 and 8. Maybe I can increase this 6. So we get actually a little bit of more number of output. So I get 4, 8, 12. All right. Now, this whole operation can actually be done in a more concise way using list comprehension. So in a list comprehension version, I can say my list is equal to num times 2 for num in numbers, and I simply say if num is an even number. So this is an abridged version or least comprehension version of my previous code. Basically, instead of writing it this way, I could just make it very compact and say, well, multiply the number by 2 for numbers for the number that is in numbers, only if number is an even number. So if I run that, I get the same thing for 8, 12. So you will see that these days, especially in a lot of codes that you see on GitHub, in other places, part of other programs, people use list comprehension very frequently, because when you want to generate a list, let's say my list, based on certain simple conditions, it's much better to actually follow this approach instead of writing the whole for loop with maybe some if conditions. That's something that I also encourage you to try to force yourself to develop